Yes, you can see it clearly. Fab. Thank you, Millie. So, as long as you're not straining too much, we'll just remind ourselves when we're looking at a literature text, any text, and we need to be writing our P paragraphs, we need to be thinking about the what, how, why, I. Every single time. It's the same for poetry, Shakespeare, whatever you're looking at, that's essentially what we have here. So the what is always going to be related to what am I talking about, which is essentially your point. What is it that I'm trying to say? What's the argument that I'm trying to make? You're then going to move on to your how. So, how has this been done? How do I know this? Which is your techniques and really picking apart how that's been put together. Then you'll move to your why, like why has it been done? Because you must remember that a grade 4 student will say, oh, there's a metaphor, oh, there's personification, oh, it's a simile. But if you don't say why it's there, why it's been used, you don't go up any higher in the grades. And that's really where I always focus with people on making sure that you get this bit right, because that's really the important bit. And then finally, the I. And now, again, I know I mentioned this last week, but it's I could be me. What do I think about this? How do I respond to this? But it could also be the I of like an audience, other readers. If you wanted to talk about the context, you could have how it relates to the people at the time that would have watched this, which was really useful for Inspector Calls last week. And also we've kind of got the writer. Maybe they're trying to say something to us, to our I. So that's the what, how, why, I that we're talking about and what they basically mean. So now we're going to look at our quote and see if we can work something out here. So our quote is, oh, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. So we've got quite a long quote there, and this is to describe Scrooge. Like I said, it doesn't really matter if you don't know Scrooge, we can still completely pick this apart. If we're thinking, okay, what are we talking about here? The key point is for Scrooge, especially in A Christmas Carol, we have Bar Humbug. He's not a nice character. He's very miserable. He takes money off of people. He doesn't like to give his money to people. So our what essentially here is that Scrooge is presented as a very unlikable character. How do I know this? Well, I know this because of, let's look at our technique. First of all, we're going to go with this. Okay, so we have an exclamation mark, which in fancy terms, Evie, I know that you're going to know this. We've got an exclamative sentence, which is basically a fancy way of saying exclamation mark, exclaiming, shouting something. But what's interesting here is that exclamative, that oh, is actually coming from the writer. It's coming from Dickens, which is really unusual. That doesn't happen a lot in writing. If you wanted to get 7 pluses, then we want to be thinking about actually that this is the author's voice coming through here, which is essentially like his intention. Very, very rare that happens, but a nice little thing to talk about. And essentially, it's just showing that even Dickens is surprised at Scrooge's behavior. Even Dickens is like, oh my goodness, what is this about? Who is this guy? What is going on here? That's pretty important in our how, exclamative, why, to show Dickens' surprise at the character of Scrooge, to show how Dickens feels towards the character of Scrooge, that he's shocked, in order to make us shocked and dislike him. Okay? Next step. Please remember, guys, any questions or anything, just type them in and I can go back to stuff. So if stuff isn't making sense, please tell me. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep rambling. So we've got our exclamative. Next thing we're going to move on to is, as you can see, we've got our commas here, loads of things. Now, in essence, what we have here is a list. He's listing things about Scrooge. Now, if you are on my TikTok or you kind of are following any of the crazy things that I'm doing, and you will know what type of list this is. So again, higher grades. Let's talk about not just a list, but the fact that we have here. My pen is not working. We have what we call an asyndetic list. Just a fancy way of saying a list that doesn't have any ands. It's just comma, 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 comma. So squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous, sinner. It's just a fancy asyndetic list, but helps get you those marks, makes you sound clever. So that's our how. Why? Why list things about Scrooge? Well, you then have to look at what is being listed. And you can see here that all of these words, squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, they are all related to, and Evie, I know you're going to remember this one too. We're going to call this, if I just put that there, we've essentially got lexis, our words. So we're going to go a semantic field, basically. So we then have this idea, because it's all linked to hands. Now, again, if you want to go up the grades, you're going to have to, in a bit more detail, talk about some of the words, group them together and say why they've been used, which we'll do in a second. So we have our semantic field of our hands. We have our asyndetic list. Almost, there's so many things I could say about Scrooge that are awful, but they all link to one thing, him being really greedy, okay? So if we were to now group these words together, if you think about squeezing and wrenching something, if we're going to talk about the use of the words squeezing and wrenching, suggest it's like you're like taking, grasping is like you're grabbing and you're taking, and it's almost like you're snatching, which is not a nice action to do. So the use of the words here in our semantic field, in our asyndetic list, essentially is that we're grasping and we're grabbing, and he's greedy. You get this image of somebody that's just like grabbing at stuff all of the time. That's really important because essentially that is Scrooge in a nutshell. He is greedy. So we know now that we can talk about some of those words in our list because that makes us go up the grades. If we don't talk about the how it's been done or the why it's been done, you don't hit up towards that 7. And we all want to be striving for that up to that 7 and above. So if we were to then take, for example, scraping and clutching. See, scraping is like, it's that thing, but luckily this isn't a whiteboard, so it doesn't do it. But scraping is that's what we've got here. We're scraping something, scraping the floor. Almost a little bit desperate, I think, scraping stuff. But essentially, you've got this, if it's desperate, you're clinging on. So here we have this idea almost of him not letting go. And suddenly, what you're doing here is you're not just talking about the words that have been used, but we're going into a bit of detail in our why. Because by explaining those words and saying, okay, we've got scraping and clutching, which gives me the idea that he doesn't want to let go. Now, if we're using that to then talk about Scrooge here as greedy, then that image of grabbing and holding on and not wanting to let go totally makes sense with him being greedy and totally helps make this picture much clearer about him. He's not a nice guy. He's all for himself. It's all about him doing this for himself. That's the image we get from our list. There's actually loads you can then say. And if you manage to say all of that, you're in your 7 pluses, okay? Because we're kind of extending our ideas further. We're going to just do this last one because this is actually important. And again, this can help push you into that top band. Covetous, loads of people don't know what that means. So I just wrote the definition here. Covetous means the desire to possess something that belongs to someone else. So not only have we got this squeezing, wrenching, desperate person, grabbing, taking, clinging on to anything he can get. But he also has the desire to have what other people want. So we're building up a picture here that this guy, not nice. Actually, nothing nice to say about him at all so far. So it's building up this image. Why building up our image of Scrooge? Now, the use of covetous is really effective, and this is where the money is, people. Okay. So if we talk about him being described as covetous, wanting to take things from other people, plus this idea of him desperately grasping and holding on to stuff, you've got that image of greed. Now, we can link that to context, which is always a good idea. And with our context, we're saying here that actually we've got a biblical reference. So in the Bible, it says, like, you must not. So you must not covet your neighbor. You must not be covetous towards others. So these are statements that are made in the Bible. And it actually, greed is linked to the deadly sins as well. So if we have this biblical reference here, there's suddenly tons we can say about him, because that's linking to the audience at the time. We can talk about the reaction of people at the time who would have totally gone, oh, he's sinning, he's showing greed, that is a sin, we do not like him, for all of these reasons. And that's your why and your I in a nutshell there. But even just talking about that one simple word, explaining what the word means, explaining why it's used in relation to Scrooge, explaining the biblical reference there and the context, that's hitting you into sevens. And that's essentially like what you need to be doing. And how well you write it, of course, is gonna help make it clearer. But we will come back to that, because I've got a ton of phrases, as a lot of you know, that really help you build your paragraphs together. So they can help you move up the grades. But essentially, so much can be said from just one quote. Loads of students say to me, oh, I can't remember quotes. Okay, just remember one or two really good ones that you can say loads about. And this is an example of a good one that you can say loads about. And I haven't even finished. Okay, so let's just remind ourselves at the end we have old sinner. Okay, so if we didn't get that biblical reference, now are fully getting this idea that he's a sinner. We don't like him. There's nothing about Scrooge here at all that we like. Just reading a message I've got from Louisa, who is new. Hi, Louisa. Useful, good. Thank you. I'm glad that is useful. I hope to see you again, and keep taking part, because it's wonderful. Tell your friends. It's where we hang out on a Wednesday. So we have Scrooge. What, how, why, I. Now, hopefully that's nice and clear. That is a lot of information. I get it. But last week, you guys impressed me, because quite a few of you had to go at writing a paragraph and emailed it over to me. I marked them and I sent them back. And I was really impressed with what in 20 minutes people have been able to take on board and have to go at doing. So we're going to do it slightly differently today. Last week, I showed you a paragraph. I showed you like a whole, this is what I wrote, you have a go. Today, I'm just making you realise how much can be said about something little. And again, people will always go, how many paragraphs do I write? How much do I have to do? Well, actually, say a lot about a little, instead of saying a little about a lot of things. Because the question is never, tell me everything you need to know about Romeo and Juliet. Oh, what happens in the story of an inspector calls? That's never the question. That's pushing you into 3s and 4s. And we want to be going 7s and higher. So just make sure you understand this concept. I'll change colour again. I hope you can see these. So we've got from that one single quote, 7+ material, people, we have our exclamative, okay? And our exclamative, if you can remember, was Dickens showing his own opinion of Scrooge. Now, that is called authorial intrusion. Grade 9 nugget there for you. Just drop it in. Oh, by the way, Dickens says, oh, exclamative. He's making his own opinions known here. Authorial intrusion, grade 9. Very, very simple. Basically, he's doing that deliberately to make us as the readers think, well, if he doesn't like him, why would we like him? Like, if you've got nothing good to say about him and you're writing about him, we've got nothing to go on, okay? So that's really important of our exclamative as our starting point. Then we mentioned a syndetic list, which again is just a list, but we're making it sound a little bit more interesting. We're pushing our grades up by saying it's an asyndetic list, and we're saying, why has this been used? How's this been used? So we have this image. Remember the semantic field that we link to that of him grabbing, clutching, pulling things in. We don't have a nice character here. So he's taking things by force. He's getting as much as he can from everywhere. And he's refusing to share, which is not nice, okay? Scrooge in a nutshell. So there's tons you can talk about from there. And then you can still keep going for those higher grades by mentioning this connotation to the Bible, the biblical reference there with covetous, and this idea that you shall not, that comes across in the Bible. So the one thing religious people at this time would have no, you shall not do this, you shall not kill, you shall not, blah, 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 keep going. They know this stuff. So they're going to dislike him because he is a sinner. Okay? High marks. And then we have essentially as an overall kind of, I suppose, a bit of mini conclusion of the I. Okay? And we have the Dickens is deliberately using his authorial intrusion to come show that he doesn't, there's a distrust, there's a dislike of Scrooge. But actually, that dislike, that judgment that he makes, automatically makes us make that judgment at the same time. So we then are kind of influenced by what he writes and how he writes. So we don't like Scrooge. We don't trust Scrooge. We don't have anything good to say about Scrooge. And that's your I kind of covered. And honestly, guys, if you managed to write a paragraph that covered all of that, you are hitting, that's insane. It's an insane amount of information to try and get in one kind of file swoop. But if you're able to use it, and for those of you that have been with me before, and we take my phrases, which are up here, now you can't see them too clearly, but we can have the writer uses the exclamative to show his dislike for Scrooge. For example, Dickens here is using his authorial intrusion, which illustrates, suggests, conveys, highlights. You could do a really, really, really good paragraph there. And that's kind of my challenge to you guys. So those of you that want to have a go, this slide will be really useful for you. If you've been making notes, they're going to be really, really useful for you. And I want you to just think about, how could I get all of that information into a P paragraph? How could I make a point, put a quote, and then really go into loads of detail about that quote? Keep coming back to the words, the techniques that are in that quote. Keep explaining it. Keep coming back. That's what you want to be doing to get those high marks. Now, if you write a paragraph, please email it to me, gemmasenglishgems@gmail.com, or you can send it to me through Facebook or anywhere else. I can be found everywhere these days on social media, which is very strange. But send it to me so I can mark it and have a look at it for you, because I had some really interesting ones last week. It's nice to be able to give feedback to people, and you get that instant help of, oh my goodness, yeah, I just needed to mention that bit. And I know for a lot of you, you're not getting any work marked if you're even have been at school. So kind of take the opportunity and send some work over. Now, I'm kind of done. I'm doing well at getting this under half an hour. I'm impressed with myself. I hope you found that useful, and I hope that it's kind of cemented some information about Scrooge for those of you that are studying Scrooge. For those of you that are not, understanding how to use the what, how, why, I into your piece of work. Um, but yeah, we are done here. Please leave me a comment. Please let me know how you're doing. Please tell your friends. Please share. And to my regulars, well, actually to all of you, do you want me to keep going over the summer? Because I'm quite happy to keep going over the summer, but it's sort of up to whether people want a break, or actually if people have had so much of a break they feel like they need to be learning. Because in that case, I'll keep going with just little nuggets every week of things that we can be doing. But if you just drop me a message, that would be really useful. Millie's saying yes. For you, Millie, of course. We'll keep going. Lots of little nuggets to throw in. It's just useful for a 20-minute, oh, need to remember this. But we need more people. So spread the word.